Okay, let's unpack this. You know that moment. That incredibly modern, deeply irritating moment when you get to the end of a long, demanding, complex day.
Oh, I know it well.
You've been navigating a difficult project, you've answered hundreds of emails, made dozens of tactical decisions, you finally get home, you open the fridge,
But it's full of food.
it's full of perfectly good ingredients, and you just stare into it with this blank, exhausted expression, and you conclude you have absolutely no idea what to make for dinner. The capacity to choose is it's gone.
It's the ultimate paradox of plenty, isn't it? We have all these resources, all these options, but zero cognitive bandwidth left to actually process them.
Exactly.
And it happens everywhere. Maybe you're staring at a wardrobe that's overflowing with clothes, 6 different pairs of pants, and you decide with complete certainty that you have nothing to wear.
I have absolutely had that moment. Or you spend, what, 45 minutes scrolling through a streaming service?
Oh, the endless scroll.
The endless scroll. You're just overwhelmed by the options, and then you just give up and decide you can't find anything at all.
We kind of joke about these things, don't we? Call them first world problems.
Right.
But they actually represent a genuine, a quantifiable cognitive crisis. What we're all experiencing in those moments is decision fatigue.
And that's what we're diving into today. It's this mental exhaustion that happens when your finite pool of cognitive resources gets systematically depleted after making a constant stream of choices all day.
Big and small, it doesn't matter. And this is far from a trivial thing. It's basically an enforced cognitive shortcut that your brain takes when those mental resources are just pushed past their limits.
So when the brain is tired, it's looking for the easy way out.
It's looking for the lowest energy path, always. And this results in behaviors like making irrational trade-offs, where you prioritize immediate relief over a long-term goal.
Like ordering the pizza instead of making the healthy meal you planned.
Exactly. Or you might oversimplify a really complex choice, or most commonly, you just default to what's familiar and safe, even if it's not the best option. It's just about avoiding the effort of thinking it through.
And the most important insight here, and I think this is what the sources really hammer home, is that this affects everyone. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how much willpower you think you have.
Absolutely. Decision fatigue is not a character flaw. We have to say that again. It is not a character flaw.
It's a resource management constraint.
Right.
It's built right into our neurobiology.
And to illustrate just how high stakes this is, you can look at really high-achieving, rational people who get this and proactively manage it. The classic anecdote is former President Barack Obama.
Right, the suits.
The suits. He famously restricted his daily wardrobe to just a few colored suits. It was always gray or blue.
And he did that specifically to eliminate a mundane daily decision.
He was a master of cognitive budgeting. He understood that every single choice, no matter how small, draws on this shared, finite pool of mental energy. So by automating or just eliminating those little decisions, he was setting his environment to default.
And by doing that, he ensured that his brain, his maximum mental capacity, was conserved for the really big things.
The truly consequential, high-stakes national security and policy choices that actually defined his job.
And the flip side is that when we don't manage this, the real-world impacts can be massive and quantifiable. This isn't just about what to wear or what to eat for dinner.
No, we see severe consequences in really demanding professions. Think about auditing, for instance. An auditor's most important tool is their professional skepticism, right, for detecting fraud.
Of course.
Well, fatigue just erodes that skepticism. Or think about healthcare, where clinicians are making life-altering decisions, one after another, under immense cognitive strain.
Or even in the judiciary. I mean, these are decisions that are supposed to be based purely on law and evidence.
But we have data showing that decision quality can be demonstrably compromised by this fatigue. So if we don't grasp the resource-based nature of this, we risk blaming the individual. We say the auditor was lazy or the judge was biased.
And really, it was a systemic metabolic resource failure.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really dive deep into the latest neurobiological science that proves decision fatigue is fundamentally a resource management problem. It's rooted in our body's chemistry, not a simple failure of personal willpower.
We're basically asking, why does my brain feel physically heavy after thinking hard all day?
That's the perfect launch point. Let's dive right into the hard science, because this is where the research has given us a completely new biological narrative.
Okay, so for decades, the main idea in psychology was something called ego-depletion, right?
Yes, the classic ego-depletion model was very popular, and it suggested that we had this single, almost metaphorical tank of willpower, like a battery that just runs dry throughout the day.
It's a compelling idea. It feels right.
It does feel right. The issue is that, despite the theory, when other researchers tried to replicate the effect in large-scale studies, they often struggled. The diminished resource effect just wasn't consistently showing up under rigorous testing, which left the actual mechanism a bit vague.
So we've moved past this idea of a willpower battery and towards something more measurable.
Precisely. The more recent and, frankly, more robust framework is what's called the neurometabolic account.
Okay.
This gives us a crystal clear biological explanation for mental fatigue and how we perceive effort. It shifts the focus away from a vague psychological resource to hard biochemistry.
So it's not a metaphor anymore.
Not at all. It emphasizes that sustained cognitive effort triggers quantifiable physical neurobiological changes, and those changes directly influence how we perceive effort and ultimately the quality of our decisions.
So when our brain is working really hard, what is actually changing at a cellular level? What is the specific chemical consequence of prolonged, intense thought?
Okay, so this brings us to the core finding, which is what researchers are calling the glutamate hypothesis.
Glutamate. I think most people hear that and think of like MSG in food.
Right, and that's not quite what we're talking about here. In the brain, glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter. It's the main go signal for your neurons. It's absolutely essential for learning, for memory, for efficient communication between brain cells.
Okay, so we need it to think.
We absolutely need it. And the research, particularly from advanced neuroimaging studies, suggests that prolonged, intense cognitive work leads to a buildup of potentially toxic waste products outside the cells in the brain. And that substance is glutamate.
It builds up.
It builds up, and specifically in the lateral prefrontal cortex, or the PFC.
Okay, let's pause there. The lateral PFC, that's like the brain's C-suite, right?
Mm-hmm.
The executive function center.
That's a great analogy, yeah. The lateral PFC is the region responsible for your executive control, your working memory, complex reasoning, task switching, overriding your automatic responses. It's the part of the brain doing the real heavy lifting of deliberation and self-control.
So if I'm doing something that requires a lot of focus, it means there's a lot of glutamate being released in my PFC. But why does it accumulate outside the cells? Doesn't the brain have, like, a cleaning system?
It does, but that cleaning system can get overwhelmed. See, when your neurons fire rapidly and continuously for hours on end, they release glutamate into the synapse, that little gap between the neurons.
Okay.
And normally specialized cells called astrocytes act like little vacuum cleaners. They quickly suck up this excess glutamate and recycle it. You can think of the astrocytes as the brain's extremely efficient janitorial crew.
But if the deliberation is sustained and intense, like an 8-hour stretch of auditing or writing complex code, the janitors can't keep up.
Exactly. The rate of release starts to exceed the rate of recycling and clearance. The glutamate starts to pile up in that space outside the cells. And this is a problem because if it reaches high enough levels, it's actually neurotoxic. It causes overexcitation.
So the brain has to pull the plug.
It has to.
Wait, so the feeling of mental fatigue, that heavy, sluggish, I can't focus sensation, is actually an evolved biological defense mechanism to protect against this chemical toxicity.
That is the compelling conclusion of the research. Mental fatigue is not just a conscious feeling of I'm tired. It is a quantifiable neuropsychological mechanism. It's a safety brake. It kicks in to stop the continued buildup of these potentially toxic byproducts.
So the brain is quite literally enforcing a mandatory rest period to preserve its own chemical integrity and prevent cell damage.
That's the theory. It's a self-preservation instinct.
That reframes everything for me. When I give up trying to choose a dinner recipe, my brain isn't being lazy. It's screaming at me, stop, I need to clear out the chemical waste before I damage myself.
In essence, yes. And that excess glutamate needs to be actively cleared out, reversed, and recycled. And this crucial recycling process, the one that restores the system's balance, it happens most efficiently during deep sleep.
Oh, so that's the connection to sleep.
It's a huge connection. If you are chronically sleep restricted, if you keep running the engine without the mandatory overnight oil change, that recycling process is severely compromised.
So you're starting the next day already at a deficit.
Exactly. Priming you for faster and more severe fatigue the moment you start working, the debt just accumulates.
So if the PFC is swimming in this excess glutamate, how does that physical accumulation translate into poor decision-making?
Well, the accumulation impairs the very function of the PFC. It degrades your cognitive control. It drastically reduces your capacity to invest any further effort into complex or new tasks.
So the brain shifts gears.
It does. As that cognitive fatigue emerges, your decision control shifts. It moves away from the high-effort, deliberative PFC and toward low-cost, habit-driven, or immediate reward actions. It becomes the path of least metabolic resistance.
This sounds like a direct connection between that metabolic drain and motivation itself. It's not just that the physical resources for focusing are gone, it's that the will to focus is reduced because the perceived cost has just skyrocketed.
And that leads directly to the link with our motivational and reward circuitry, which primarily involves dopamine. Sustained attention and cognitive effort, they deplete the internal regulatory resources you need for that high-level thinking. And this neurobiological stress eventually leads to reduced responsiveness in our dopaminergic pathways.
Dopamine is so frequently misunderstood. People think it's just the pleasure chemical, but it's really about the pursuit, right?
Yeah.
The prediction of a reward and the motivation to overcome obstacles to get it.
That's a much better way of putting it. Dopamine is a key component of the effort-related motivational circuitry. It calculates the necessary cost-benefit ratio for any action. It's the part of the brain that asks, is this reward worth the energy I need to spend?
So when the system is dysregulated by that PFC fatigue and the glutamate buildup, that whole effort versus value calculation gets severely skewed.
It does. So if my PFC is struggling, my brain requires a much, much bigger reward signal, a bigger dopamine hit, to justify the effort of, say, calculating my taxes or planning a healthy meal than it would if I was rested.
That makes so much sense.
The reduced responsiveness means that rewards that previously seemed totally worth the grind now appear disproportionately costly in terms of effort. This shows up as a reduced willingness to persist or to expend effort for a given reward. It confirms that what looks like a lack of persistence is actually a physiological dysregulation in your effort-based decision network.
The internal calculation literally changes.
It does. The brain is saying the cost in chemical maintenance is simply not worth the external benefit, and it shuts the operation down.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that internal neurometabolic state we just described is constantly being assaulted by the external world we live in.
It is. Our modern environment is, you could say, actively hostile to resource conservation.
It really feels that way.
We are suffering from an epidemic of choice overload, and this is the silent, pervasive cost of our digital age. Just think about it for a second. Every app you use, every notification ping, the thousands of products on a grocery store shelf, the complex pricing tiers for every single service.
It's a constant stream of low-grade evaluation.
Yes, it's depleting our cognitive resources before we even get to the main task of the day.
And the cumulative effect of that choice overload is a documented deterioration of our decision quality and our overall efficiency. When we are forced to make rapid, frequent choices under that kind of load, our behavior shifts. We move away from trying to find the best option and toward just protecting our resources.
Absolutely. The entire decision strategy changes. Individuals become inherently more conservative. They start opting for the safest, the easiest, or the pre-selected default options.
It's an avoidance strategy.
A direct avoidance strategy. They're trading the potential for finding the optimal choice for the certainty of a low-effort decision. The brain is basically saying, I don't have the energy to find the best. I'll just take the good enough that requires zero effort.
We see this play out in consumer research on something called the Decoy effect. Could you give us a concrete, relatable example of how just having more choices can make us irrational?
Certainly. The Decoy effect is a great illustration of how overload influences quality. So imagine a premium coffee shop. They offer 3 tiers of espresso machine subscriptions. Option A, the basic one, is $5 a month. Option B, the premium one, is $15 a month. And then they introduce option C, a Decoy, for $20 a month, which is only marginally better than option B.
So option C is clearly not a good value compared to option B, but its presence changes the whole calculation.
Exactly. Research shows that just by increasing the number of alternatives with that Decoy, participants become more likely to select option B, the expensive but now middle ground option.
Because the Decoy makes it look reasonable by comparison.
Precisely. When we're overwhelmed by all the data points, 3 tiers, different features, different prices, the brain often just skips the rigorous optimization process and selects the path that requires the least justification. It chooses the safe bet middle option rather than expending the energy to really reevaluate if the basic tier was actually good enough.
And this high cognitive load doesn't just make us default to the middle option. It has serious implications for more complex things, like financial and risk-taking behaviors, doesn't it?
It does. Studies that look at economic behavior show a very strong correlation. When participants are operating under greater cognitive strain, meaning their resource pool is depleted, they tend to ignore crucial information like opportunity costs.
So they don't think about what they're giving up by making a certain choice.
Exactly. They invest fewer cognitive efforts overall in the choice tasks, and sort of counterintuitively, they become prone to taking more risks.
That connection is deeply concerning. So you're depleted, your judgment is strained, and suddenly you're more susceptible to impulsive high-risk choices because you lack the mental energy to fully simulate the negative consequences.
It's a recipe for disaster in decision-making, which is why institutions are now trying to intervene with things like default nudges.
Those pre-selected options you see everywhere. The box that's already checked for you.
Right, they're designed to guide your behavior while reducing the cognitive demand.
These nudges sound like the environmental answer to decision fatigue, like a helpful guardrail. But the sources highlight that this is a double-edged sword that can easily backfire.
It is. In high-stakes environments, like in studies involving auditors who have to maintain intense professional skepticism, nudges can act as really powerful conditional scaffolds. When the auditors were under a heavy cognitive load, the default nudges actually accelerated their responding and, crucially, improved their accuracy.
So it helped them by offloading the deliberation process.
It did. It's a great value for reducing strain on a fatigued brain.
But the danger is in the misalignment. If that nudge is aimed at the wrong outcome, it just accelerates the wrong behavior.
Precisely. If the default nudge is misaligned, for example, if it nudges the auditor towards classifying a transaction as low risk when deep skeptical deliberation is actually required, it can severely reduce accuracy.
So it's exploiting the brain's intuitive, low-effort System 1 processing.
Exactly. Instead of encouraging the necessary, effortful System 2 deliberation, it helps the exhausted brain choose quickly, but it can remove the mechanism that ensures the choice is critically sound.
Moving beyond these manufactured inputs, we have to talk about the physiological constants of modern life that are constantly eroding our decision capacity. Chronic stress and poor sleep.
They're like a constant drain.
They are. They act as powerful, non-stop modulators of the prefrontal cortex itself.
Let's take stress. Acute stress, the classic fight-or-flight response, is adaptive for survival. It floods your system with hormones, it boosts your sensory gain, makes you hypervigilant.
Great for avoiding a saber-toothed tiger, but terrible for drafting a quarterly budget.
Exactly. That mobilization comes at a significant cognitive cost. Acute stress negatively affects the highest-order cognitive engagement, especially processes like working memory and complex problem-solving.
And in the modern world, so much of our stress is chronic and insidious. Like the sources mentioned, technostress.
Yes, the cognitive overhead and emotional fatigue from the excessive and often compulsory use of technology. It acts as a constant, low-grade psychological stressor that continually compounds our cognitive overload and drives decision fatigue.
It's that feeling of always being on, always needing to check something, always responding to the environment. And if you couple that with sleep restriction, the system has no chance to recover.
Sleep restriction, or SR, and the mental fatigue that results from it severely impair perceptual cognitive performance across the board. Studies on trained athletes show that SR results in significantly slowed reaction times and reduced accuracy. This isn't just feeling tired, it's a profound physiological impairment.
And it links directly back to that neurometabolic account we discussed, specifically the glutamate recycling.
Yes. The system requires a complete overnight reboot. Since the clearance of that accumulated, potentially neurotoxic glutamate happens primarily during deep sleep, restricting your sleep means you are actively restricting your brain's ability to clear its own metabolic waste.
So you wake up already operating with a deficit, pre-fatigued, primed to hit the cognitive wall much, much faster.
The debt just keeps growing.
And to bring this all back to the real-world consequences of this physiological drain, the sources provide a really stark and powerful example. It involves the judicial system, and it just hammers home how high the stakes are.
It's perhaps the most disturbing real-world demonstration of decision fatigue I've ever read about.
So researchers analyzed thousands of judicial rulings, and they found that the likelihood of a judge granting a favorable ruling to a petitioner, say, granting parole.
It started the day at around 65%. A pretty good chance.
Right, but it dropped gradually and dramatically from that 65% down to nearly zero within each decision session.
A shift from a 2/3 chance of success to virtually no chance, all over the course of just a few hours. It's astonishing to think that someone's freedom could be determined by what time of day their case is heard.
And here is the absolutely critical data point from that study. That likelihood returned abruptly, immediately after a strategic pause.
Like a meal break, a short reset.
And it jumped right back up to approximately 65%.
Wow.
This finding is just a massive indictment of that old willpower theory, isn't it?
Oh, completely. It strongly suggests that the shift in decision quality was not based on some inherent bias against the petitioners or even the legal merits of the cases. It was based on a metabolic or resource restoration mechanism.
A mechanism that was strategically replenished during the pause. The judge's internal chemical budget, not the content of the file, dictated the outcome.
Decision fatigue, in that case, literally held the power of freedom or denial.
That judicial example is just. It's a powerful conclusion to that section. It really shows us the scale of the problem. So, given that the underlying issue is defined by this metabolic depletion, the glutamate buildup, the dopamine dysregulation, the constant external load, the solution has to be intentional, proactive resource management.
Right. It's about strategic restoration.
That's the core principle for moving forward, isn't it? If the brain is actively trying to protect its own chemical integrity by inducing fatigue, we have to focus on deliberate activities that help recycle those toxic byproducts or that actively signal the brain to reset.
Let's start small. Let's start with the concept of micro breaks. We're not talking about needing a 2-week vacation here. We're talking about targeted pauses during the workday. How effective are these tiny interventions scientifically?
It sounds almost too simple to work.
The science is clear that even very short pauses, sometimes as brief as 1 to 2 minutes, function as bona fide neural reboots.
A neural reboot, I like that.
The underlying mechanism is complex, but one effect is that they allow the brain's neural networks to reset their synaptic efficiency. When you're hyper-focused, the same neural pathways are firing constantly. A short break allows for a temporary rebalancing, which helps restore alertness and cognitive control for the next task.
So it's not just a nice little break. It's a necessary physical restoration of neurological function.
Absolutely. And physiologically, micro breaks provide multiple benefits. They can lower cortisol levels, reducing those markers of chronic stress we just talked about.
Okay.
And crucially, they encourage neural pattern shifting. Prolonged, deep work forces your brain into a very focused, highly localized thinking mode. A microbreak encourages a shift toward a more diffuse, global thinking mode.
Which is often crucial for creative problem solving.
Yes, and it can actively help clear the working memory backlog.
So this means the type of break you take should be optimized based on the type of work you're doing.
Precisely. The optimization principle is contrast and complementarity. So if you're a knowledge worker, you spend all day sitting and engaging in intense, abstract thought. Your break should prioritize physical movement and sensory input.
Get up, walk around, look out a window.
5 to 10 minutes of stretching or walking outside can leverage these complementary recovery activities. Conversely, someone in a physically demanding role might benefit more from a focused, quiet mental reset, like a short meditation.
The goal is to align with the body's natural productivity cycles.
Right, the ultra-anarrodian rhythms, roughly 90 to 120 minutes. And you intervene strategically before the cognitive drop really occurs.
Okay, so a second powerful restoration tool is deliberately exposing yourself to nature. This is supported by something called the attention restoration theory, or RT. It feels really intuitive, but what's the specific cognitive mechanism at work here?
RT is a very robust psychological framework. It suggests that natural environments provide what is called soft fascination.
Soft fascination.
This is a kind of attention that's captured effortlessly, like watching water ripple or clouds drift, or observing the fractal patterns in trees. It doesn't demand the directed, effortful attention that reading a spreadsheet or solving a puzzle does.
So nature holds your attention, but gently, which allows the prefrontal cortex, our overwhelmed PFC, to actually rest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It allows the very region where that glutamate accumulates to recover and reset. It restores your focus, attention, and your executive function by providing a restorative input that requires zero conscious effort from you.
The evidence for this is pretty strong, right?
Oh, it's overwhelming. The sources note that spending at least 120 minutes a week in nature, and not all at once, but cumulatively, is associated with demonstrably better health and well-being outcomes. It's like a scientifically validated prescription for cognitive maintenance.
And what what about those of us who live and work in highly urban environments? Can this be translated into, say, design elements?
It absolutely can. That's the whole realm of biophilic design. Research shows that just integrating natural patterns, using specific colors, textiles, or visuals that emulate the natural world, even just having views of green spaces or placing plants inside, has a measurable beneficial influence on health and well-being.
So you're gently nudging the PFC toward rest just by using design.
You're providing a small, continuous, restorative input in your office or your home environment.
Okay, finally, let's circle back to the oldest hypothesis about energy and willpower: glucose, the sugar.
Right.
Earlier research suggested that self-control was simply a matter of running out of sugar for fuel. How has modern science refined that idea to fit this new neurometabolic framework?
This is one of the most surprising findings, and it fully supports this new model of signaling over raw energy. The initial hypothesis was very straightforward. Self-control relies on glucose. It's a finite energy source, and when your blood glucose drops, you get decision fatigue.
It makes sense.
It does. However, when later, more sophisticated studies were done, they provided a radical refinement.
Okay, what was the critical refinement that challenged that idea of metabolic burning?
The key finding was this. Oral supplementation of glucose enhanced self-control, but only if it was mouth-rinsed and then spit out. It was not actually ingested and metabolized.
Wait, what? So they didn't even swallow the sugar water?
They didn't. The participants were just sensing the glucose with their taste buds, but they weren't receiving the caloric energy, which proves it wasn't about fueling the brain like you'd fuel a car.
That completely flips the script. It means we aren't running out of gas. We're running on fumes, and the glucose acts as an alarm reset button, not a refueling pump.
Precisely. This suggests the effect is due entirely to a neural signaling mechanism. The sensing of glucose in your mouth stimulates specific brain regions, notably the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC.
And the ACC is a crucial area involved in, what, monitoring for errors and regulating self-control.
Exactly. It's like the brain's internal conflict monitor. So by sensing the glucose, your mouth sends a signal to the ACC that says, hey, high-value energy is imminent. And the brain responds by basically moderating the self-control depletion alarm.
So the neural signal temporarily quiets the fatigue signal, which enhances our capacity to exert control, even though the chemical waste, the glutamate, has not actually been cleared yet.
That's the mechanism. It's a profound difference. The glucose doesn't refuel the brain. It signals the brain to turn down the internal fatigue alarm.
Which means practical applications might involve simple, non-caloric sensory inputs. Could a mint or even a flavored rinse work if the goal is just signaling the ACC?
The focus is definitely on signaling and restoration rather than brute energy replacement, which strongly reinforces this entire neurometabolic model. While the research focused on glucose, any strong sensory input that modulates the ACC or provides a restorative moment like an intense flavor or fragrance could potentially contribute to moderating that perception of depletion.
So it's a psychological and neural trick. It gives you a temporary reprieve to push through, or ideally, get yourself to a proper rest period.
That's it, exactly.
So what does this entire journey mean for the listener? For the person trying to navigate the incredible cognitive complexity of modern life, the endless notifications, the chronic stress?
It means we have to fundamentally change how we frame mental struggle and what we perceive as failure. We've successfully transitioned the understanding of decision fatigue from, a vague failure of character, a deficiency in grit or moral fortitude, to a quantifiable neurometabolic resource problem.
A problem rooted in chemical toxicity, like the glutamate dynamics, the chronic stress erosion, and just the overwhelming modern cognitive load.
Right.
And the practical conclusion is clear. We started by defining our mission, and now we can affirm the core principle derived from this deep dive into the scientific evidence. Decision fatigue is a resource management problem, not a character flaw.
It is the brain's internal warning light. That's the best way to think of it. When you feel overwhelmed, when you can't make one more choice, when you opt for the low-effort default, your brain is actively attempting to preserve its chemical integrity and its precious bandwidth.
So you are not failing. Your system is correctly signaling overload.
You're not failing at all.
And this mandates a shift in our daily strategy.
Mm.
Instead of blaming your willpower when you choose the same microwave meal every Tuesday or when you feel paralyzed by choice, you should be treating your cognitive capacity like a complex metabolic budget.
A budget that requires proactive environmental management, eliminating choices, setting defaults, and strategic, intentional breaks for metabolic replenishment.
And that strategic realization leads to our final provocative thought for you.
If every tiny decision, from choosing a suit color to what to stream to whether you take a plastic bag, if every single one inherently draws on a single finite cognitive resource that is biochemically replenished only during quality sleep, then what critical choices are you willing to eliminate, automate, or default on today to ensure your brain has maximum capacity for the decisions that truly define your life, your relationships, and your future? Recognizing the limit is the first step toward effective resource management.